ladies. Welcome to our No Bad Days Simple Wellness for Women show. I'm Jolene Fisher, your host, and every episode of the No Bad Days show will give you a glimpse into the life of another woman. She'll share her stories, her triumphs, her struggles, and the lessons that she's learned along the way. And my goal as your host is to bring topics to you that are relevant and encouraging, because I want you to be inspired to be the hero of your own story. This is why I introduce you to brave women doing hard things, or writing cool books, and doing hard things, and living out the meaning of the motto, No Bad Days. So today I want to introduce you to Dr. Robin Pickering, and she has been a kind of a friend / acquaintance of mine for years. I used to teach at Whitworth University, and that's where she currently teaches. And so I'm going to do her formal bio for you. Robin Pickering is currently Program Director of Women and Gender Studies and an Associate Professor of Health Sciences specializing in community health at Whitworth University in Spokane, Washington. Her research interests include various issues related to women's health and sexual education. She currently serves as the advisory board for Eastern Washington University Alumni Magazine, as well as a contributor for several local media publications. She has served as the vice chair of the board for the Spokane AIDS Network, Program Director of Community Health at Eastern Washington University, and the steering committee for members of the Masters of Public Health degree for EWU. Robin received her PhD in education with an emphasis on health, psychology, and adult education, and a master's degree in exercise science and pedagogy, and a bachelor's degree in health promotion and wellness. She has also served on the board of Early Head Start, the Spokane Birth Outcome Task Force, and various other committees committed to promoting community health. Robin is a certified wellness coach and currently serves as a personal development consultant specializing in sexual assault prevention for the Spokane Chiefs, a local hockey team, and instructed yoga in the community for 16 years. Woo! It's amazing. You're a busy lady, but all good things serving the community. And today we're here to talk about your upcoming book and the things that you're passionate about right now. And so I want you to just start off by telling us a little bit about your background and what got you into the movement of teaching sexual education to our kids.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. As you can tell, listening to that, I'm interested in a lot of things related to health, and particularly a lot of things related to women's health. And so I think I got really interested in this particular topic, just being a young mom and sort of looking at some of the struggles that were associated with being a young single mom. And I really got passionate about helping people to make really informed decisions about their sexual health at that point. And as I began to study that in grad school, I really started to recognize that there was really kind of a disconnect between what the science was saying about, promoting good sexual health and what people were learning in schools and what parents were really comfortable talking to their children about. So I really started getting interested just sort of in that disconnect. And then as I started teaching in that field, I really noticed that there was just a lot of questions that young people had that really sort of started to help me to really see that there was a disconnect between what kids were learning in school and kind of what was best for their health and development into healthy young adults. So I really started seeing that I felt like my role was to help to educate parents on how to raise healthy kids. And so I really just developed this passionate interest, and it seems to have taken on a new life as I began to talk to parents and just hear how much they want to learn about this and how they want to get better talking to their kids, but they just need more tools to do that.
Right. It is such a touchy subject. I have a 15-year-old and 17-year-old girls and a 21-year-old son, and at any age, it's just awkward, right?
It is. I find that a lot of parents maybe are comfortable with the puberty talk, or at least somewhat comfortable, and maybe comfortable with the, hey, we don't want you having sex talk. But oftentimes those are sort of the two talks that people have if they have them with their kids. And it's my belief, based on the research, that if we have an open, honest communication just over time throughout childhood with our children, that really seems to be more effective than just sort of learning how to do two big talks that are awkward for both parties and then never speak of it again.
Right. Because let's face it, we can't let the elementary schools start the conversation and let their friends finish it for them, right? Like
Exactly.
Videos that are shown today in health classes are from the 1980s. And I think that's something we need to fix.
I would agree. And, to be quite frank, the world that our children are growing up in is very different from the world that we grew up in. So the introduction of social media and the ease at which people can access information about sexuality has just completely changed. So kids are curious. They will be curious. And if it isn't talked about at home, and it's honestly very rarely talked about at school, they're going to go online or to their friends to find out about sex. And it's just my belief that it is better to have informed, educated people talking to children about sexuality versus, whatever Google search they happen to encounter.
Right. Because let's face it, their tablets, iPods, even at a young age, if that's all you're giving them, they have access to the World Wide Web and it's runs the gamut. So that is a little bit scary.
Absolutely.
So where
I think we can proactively kind of, I don't think there's a way to eliminate that sort of access. And even if parents are choosing not to give their kids cell phones or not to have a computer, a private computer, they have friends, they have friends on the bus. And in fact, kids are at a very young age being exposed to that sort of content. So it's very hard to monitor. So it's my belief that if we can instead be open about that communication, then we can sort of counteract some of that exposure.
Okay. At what age do you think it's appropriate to start having the first conversation, and what does that first conversation entail?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, and one of the things that I explore in the book is this idea that discussions about sexuality, and again, sexuality and sexual development being something different from sex itself, really should start young. And in fact, in some of the places where we see the best outcomes in terms of, reduced rates of teenage pregnancy, reduced rates of sexually transmitted infection, sexual assaults, etc. And some of the places that do the very best with that, like the Netherlands, for example, they actually are starting formal sexuality education to kids as young as 4 years old. And again, that's not a conversation about sex itself, but it's a conversation about body parts and what they're actually called, about being assertive about sexual contact, or physical contact rather, and when to tell people, that you don't want to be touched. Those sort of things start, again, as young as 4 years old. And what they find is that oftentimes parents, because we do want to shelter our kids, we want them to be safe, and we don't want them to have to think about those sort of topics when they're young. But what we find is a lot of parents will give pet names, because they won't want to use actual medical terminology to describe genitals. But what they actually are inadvertently doing when they do that is making it more difficult for children to communicate when they are being touched inappropriately, if that is unfortunately to happen. And so by actually being able to articulate, somebody touched this part of me, and using actual terminology for that, it actually keeps kids safer. So that sort of education is starting young. And even things like, for example, not forcing young children to hug people that they don't want to hug, or give someone a kiss that they don't want to give a kiss. So starting those sort of things early, in terms of if somebody, if they say, no, I don't want to hug that person, respecting that. And those are the sort of lessons that can start really young, and that will lead itself to different types of conversations. And even having conversations, watching television, for example, and saying, oh, it looks like that person did a really good job of expressing themselves, that they didn't like that thing, or empowering kids to use their voice when things don't feel right. Those are some of the earliest lessons, and those can start again age 4 and 5.
Okay, wow, great answer. I'm sure there's so much to unpack in all of that, in each thing that you even said. Like anywhere from social media to the words that we say to how we identify sexually anymore. And there is a lot of controversy over identification of sexuality now. And how do you address that in the book? And what is research showing is maybe a trend in that area where people are not identifying as female or male anymore, and how are we doing that?
Right. Well, that's, again, a tough question in that I look at sexuality education as a means to keep kids safe and a way to develop sexually healthy adults. I think that's the goal for sexuality education. And what I guess my critique is of a lot of our current models of sexuality education are really geared towards kids who are not having sex, who are identify as heterosexual. And so the message that they're often getting is, to not have sex. And the assumption is that it is, again, a heterosexual relationship that people will eventually be involved in. And I view sort of access to that information to keep you healthy, to keep you safe, I view that as a human right. And so when we're gearing a message towards only some kids, I really believe that we are not sort of accepting the full humanity of all kids, and we are selling them short if we are not tailoring messages that are appropriate for all kids. I've had, as a professor, I've had, college age people approach me and say, yeah, I knew I was gay from the age 11 on, and nothing that they were talking about in school applied to what I was doing. So I thought I was safe until I came to college and realized I was in a lot of risky situations without knowing it. And that really sort of struck me, like we are doing a disservice to a fair amount of number of kids. And I just don't think that that is appropriate. I think that our model of sexuality education needs to cater to all kids. I believe it is their human right to have access to information that keeps them safe. And I think we need to do a better job at doing that.
Yeah, it makes me think of how we as parents and educators will want to bury our head in the sand and not think about the fact that there are a lot of communities out there engaging in sex in various different ways, and what is safe look like for this community versus this, and then or this couple, and that's to assume that it should just be educated in this one way is like you said, not safe for those other kids, because we can't just assume that they're getting it, like understanding. It has to come from education from the parents or from someone they trust, right?
Exactly. I think it's really important that schools not only be in a situation where they can teach a comprehensive sexuality curriculum, but I also think parents need to be aware of sort of all of the complex things that go into being a sexual being. I think people need to understand anatomy and basic physiology and sort of the different types of people and behaviors. And I think that even if even if your child doesn't maybe identify in that way, they will have friends and classmates that do. And I think the more informed both young people and adults are, the better off all of us are, the more safe and inclusive our environments are.
Okay. So talk to us a little bit more about your book. Just tell us more about it and what it is that it's meant to inform us of. Probably all the things you're talking about, but.
Yeah, exactly. All the things I'm talking about. Basically, the book was kind of born out of exactly what I was just talking about. I find so many parents want to have these conversations and want good things to happen for their kids and want them to be healthy and happy and safe and comfortable with their bodies and abstinent and have good relationships and know how to recover when they get their heart broken and know how to deal with puberty and the way that their body's changing. And I think parents want to be able to connect with their kids within the umbrella of those topics, but just don't know how. So my book is basically an exploration of all of these different topics. So things like consent and what does affirmative consent mean and what does it look like and how do we teach it? How do we prepare people for this sort of post #MeToo world where our notion of consent is really in some ways changed over time? How do we prepare kids to live in that environment? How do we prepare kids and parents to sort of talk in healthy ways about these topics? So each chapter is exploring a different topic. So whether that be gender identity, whether that be consent or puberty or birth control or sexually transmitted infections, each chapter explores a different topic and then gives age-appropriate guidelines in terms of what things might you want to talk to your kids about concerning that topic at each sort of stage of development. So it gives parents kind of cues and talking points to have those conversations with their kids so that parents feel a little bit more confident in answering questions their kids might have, and kids that get the benefit of sort of this lifelong approach to sexuality education at home.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you to give me some advice as a mother.
Okay.
Daughters who are dating boys. And
yes.
Just give me what you would, I mean, I know this is probably a lot longer conversation, but how would you start the conversation with your daughter?
Right.
About that?
About starting dating?
No, about I'm dating and I'm really into this guy, and how do I navigate the sexual conversation with them now that they're dating? Although it happened already, as you said, it has to happen throughout the time that, you can't just do it once and expect them to remember and to uphold all those things.
Exactly. Well, I think I can tackle that in a few different parts. So one of the most surprisingly important things I think we can do is to be quiet and listen. And I think it's our just how we are wired. We want to start immediately sort of throwing advice out there in terms of don't do this, don't do this, I don't want you doing this. And sometimes those kind of conversations can sort of shut down truth and sharing. So I think part of one of the most important things that we can do is just listen to their concerns, listen to their feelings, be a safe place where they can come and share. I think another important piece is to be fairly clear about what your expectations and what your boundaries are in terms of your expectations of their behavior. Sort of clarifying values and sort of identifying if there's disconnects between, what your daughter's core values are and maybe what behaviors she might be considering. Also, being clear about staying safe and what options are out there to stay safe depending on, whatever decision making might happen. I think one of the main things I like to communicate with students are sort of going through that mental process before you're in any sort of heated situations. So we make better decisions when we plan ahead, when we think about, these are my boundaries and this is what I'm not willing to cross. This is what's important to me. These are what my values are. Making those sort of preparations. And if they do decide to be sexually active, making those preparations ahead of time in terms of staying safe, so that none of these decisions happen at the heat of the moment, prom night or any of these places where emotions might be high, but instead sort of thinking ahead of time about these sort of things. And I really like to encourage people to make decisions that way. And again, just having informed discussions ahead of time.
Okay. I think that we're getting a little bit of weird feedback. Is your internet okay on your end?
I'm not seeing anything that is unusual on my end.
Okay.
I can do a check here with audio.
Nope, I think we're good.
Are we okay?
Yeah. It was just kind of cutting out there, and your voice was getting garbled sounding, and it was slow, like a slow beat. I could still hear everything you were saying. It was just slow, a little bit slow.
A little garbled. Okay.
No,
yeah, I haven't seen anything on my end.
I want to continue on with that conversation because we talked about you're talking about boundaries, and let's move into the topic of consent, because that is such a hot topic right now. And I know that on college campuses, they're trying to teach this concept of consent because hookup culture is so huge on college campuses and in general with Twitter, or not Twitter. What's that app? Tinder and the
Tinder.
Yeah, Tinder. And kids are just doing this now more frequently. And that idea of consent is so now they're asking you to be very vocal about it and saying yes prior to engaging in sex. But in what I would say, the way we grew up is that it was like, well, you're just into each other and things are happening and you don't really say anything. It just happens. So then people can get in trouble if that's the case. And so how do we avoid that? Because that can ruin people's lives.
Absolutely. And I think this is maybe one of the most important takeaways, and maybe one of the most important things that I talk about in the book is how do we teach consent? And I think you bring up a good point. We were raised sort of in this no means no culture, where as long as you didn't say no, consent was implied. And even if, I cringe when I watch even movies that I grew up with and loved, because we were sort of raised in this culture of normalized, non-consent. And I think one of the most important things you can take away is that as we move toward what we call affirmative consent, and that's where instead of no means no, it's actually explicit yes means yes. So one of the things to think about is consent is freely given, meaning it's not coerced. Somebody doesn't say no and then you push and push and push and then they finally stop saying no, or they then say yes. Consent is freely given. Another important concept about consent is that it's reversible. So if someone were to say, yes, I am ready to have sex, I think tonight is the night. And then tonight happens and they say, actually, I changed my mind. I don't want to do this. Consent is reversible. So you can absolutely change your mind at any moment. And it's actually specific too. So if someone is consenting to this particular behavior, it is not a green light for another behavior. So it's important to teach kids that it is reversible. It is independent of anything else that they might have agreed to. Some of those concepts are important. It also is really important that consent means that someone is capable of giving consent. So if someone's under the influence of drugs or alcohol, or it should go without saying, but doesn't always, if they're passed out or asleep, any of those things negate their ability to give consent. So consent needs to be taught in an affirmative way. So, can I hold your hand? Is it okay if I kiss you? Yes. So explicitly teaching people to ask permission and being aware and understanding. And those lessons can start, again, very young. Asking before you kiss somebody, asking before you hug somebody. Those sort of lessons can be taught early so that we're just sort of raising kids to understand the importance of that.
Robin, this is so scary because I'm 43 years old and just learned affirmative consent within the last year. Mm-hmm. And I have a 15, 17-year-old and 21-year-old, and I've never taught them this. And yeah. I read a book called Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. Mm. And he talks about that in the book. Gives several cases on college campuses about hookup culture and the consent and what it means to have consent. And I've never taught my kids that. And I don't think that they even understand that. And that is, like you said, it's one of the most important things as a takeaway today that we could be teaching our children is this affirmative consent. What I learned too is that WSU has a video. I'm curious about what your thoughts are on this, but they have a video rather than actual people in the video talking to each other about consent. They use sharing a cup of tea as to whether or not that's appropriate consent. And I'm like, why can't we just be like real? Does it have to be sharing a cup of tea? But I don't know if you've seen that video or not.
I have. It's actually a pretty commonly used sort of analogy to teach consent. And it's, hey, if somebody doesn't want tea, you don't shove the tea down their throat. If someone's passed out, you don't try to get them to drink the tea. And I think for some, it really sort of clicks, this understanding of forcing someone to take something that they don't want to take or to accept something that they don't want to accept. And yeah, I think it's, for some, it feels like a safe way to present that. But I like what you said about, hey, can't we just sort of be real and explicit about some of these conversations? And I agree. I think it is a good way to help some people understand it. But again, I'm a big proponent of just open, honest conversation about some of these things. I think it helps to destigmatize a topic that people dance around for that very reason. They're uncomfortable. And I think the more we talk about these things openly, the more comfortable all of us get having these conversations.
Absolutely. Definitely going to be having these conversations later tonight with the kids in our home. Tell me a little bit more about the Me Too movement. For people that don't know a lot about it, I think we've all heard about it, but maybe don't quite know what the movement was. And then now that we're the post-Me Too movement, what are we to learn from that? And how are we moving forward for those of us that we're working in the workplace with other people and things are going on around us?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Me Too movement has actually sort of slowly gained traction, and then it very rapidly gained a lot of traction around the Harvey Weinstein case, basically. And a lot of people came forward and said, #MeToo, meaning I have been a victim of sexual assault in some way. And what we found is, following the movement, a lot of people came forward and said, yes, this happened to me, and this gave me the empowerment I needed to talk about it, to report it, to sort of empower other women to share. And it really made a lot of workplaces aware of the harassment that goes on a day-to-day basis in our work, in our schools, in our college campuses. And it brought an awareness of a problem that's been existing that has always existed, really. And we're just having a lot of people feeling empowered by it. So there's been some amazing intended consequences from it, and then some not so great unintended consequences from it, where some men are feeling like they're being targeted, or like they don't know how to talk to women anymore, or they don't exactly know how to, am I supposed to give hugs? Am I not supposed to give hugs? Am I supposed to compliment somebody on their appearance? Am I not supposed to compliment somebody on their appearance? Some people have been afraid now to take women on work trips, or afraid to take women out to sort of company gatherings that are informal after work, and sort of have a lot of questions about what does it mean to be appropriate in the workplace. And really what's been appropriate hasn't changed. A lot of those things have always been appropriate, and they continue to be, a lot of those things have been inappropriate always, and they continue to be inappropriate. But it has created some situations where women are finding that they maybe aren't getting some of the opportunities to network and do different things as an unintended result. So part of what I'm excited about doing is educating people in workplaces on how do we sort of meet the needs of men and women in the workplace. How do we make sure that our policies aren't unintentionally negatively impacting women? So family leave policies, or travel policies, or breastfeeding at work policies, or lack thereof. So really helping companies to recognize how they can better accommodate women in the workplace and work effectively together, now that people have a heightened awareness of some of these things.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but The Morning Show with Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon.
I have not.
You haven't? Okay. It's only available on Apple TV, but my husband and I watched the whole first series of it. And it goes through the anchor being fired for sexual harassment, and it shows all sides of the story. So you see all his work buddies affected, the people that he's worked with for 20 plus years, how he's affected by it, how the women who reported it are affected by it. And I think it does a great job of explaining what this is all about, and consent, how somebody can get in trouble regarding consent, how a woman, how they don't really go into how, when you're in those situations, what do you do? I mean, it's a TV show, but I think that one of the things that stands out for me is, and a question I still have is, if a woman is feeling overpowered sexually by a male who's of higher standing than her in the workplace, how does she say no without feeling like her job is going to be affected, or that she's going to be fired, or in some way lose that? Or do we tell women it doesn't matter either way, you just get out and you say no and you run? Or you like what do you tell your daughters? What do you tell your coworkers? Those kind of things.
Right. Well, I'll address it from a micro level and from a macro level. So it's not as clear cut as people would like it to be. You know, so many people after sort of this Me Too movement, I often heard people saying, well, why aren't they just reporting it? Why didn't they report this a long time ago? You know, when Bill Cosby and all these women came forward, you know, many, many, many years later, a lot of people said, well, you know, it's questionable. Why wouldn't somebody just report it right away? And I think you brought up exactly why people don't report these things right away. Women already face a lot of challenges in the workplace, especially in male-dominated fields. And when they are in a situation where maybe they're experiencing sexual harassment or some of that, those workplace issues, it's difficult to come forward because women don't want to have this label of being a troublemaker, or they don't want to lose opportunities, or even lose their job, or be labeled someone that's difficult to work with. So oftentimes women don't report, and they just keep on experiencing these situations day after day and maybe learn to navigate around them. So one of the things that people can do is have policies in place to start with. So a specific chain of, if something's happening, where do you go? Whether it be human resources or some other process that you can follow. Companies are better off if they have those things explicitly in place and spelled out clearly for employees. And I wish I had something better to say in terms of, I wish I could say, it always ends great and it always gets resolved and it always goes, the way that it should. That's unfortunately not the case. So that's one of the things that makes it so important that we start this education early on, so that we're hopefully preventing these things from happening in the first place. Yes. So one of the things that I've recently been doing is going to workplaces and talking to people about, what do microaggressions look like towards women? What do positive policies look like in the workplace? If we can sort of teach this workplace culture, by the time it gets to sexual harassment, there's a whole iceberg below the surface of culture issues that are usually happening before it even gets to something that we can see, like sexual harassment. So building a workplace culture that's respectful, that values women, that sort of has clear boundaries about what's appropriate, that has policy that supports women, all of those things in place hopefully prevent sexual harassment from happening. But it's also important that women know where to go if they have those concerns.
Okay. Thank you. Wow. There's so many things was covered in this book. I'm excited for it. So it's your evidence-based. And so tell me about some of the research you've been doing in this field. I mean, obviously a lot of it is what you've personally been researching. So what's your most passionate area in this book that you personally research?
That's a great question. Boy, to pick a single topic. My personal research that I've done throughout my career has been largely focused on self-efficacy and empowerment and those sorts of things. Much of the research that I've done for this book has really been sort of gathering of secondary information. One of the things, again, that I find so interesting about this topic is that so much evidence already exists. There's so many recommendations from experts who have studied this for literally decades in terms of what makes sexually healthy adults. How do we get there? And there's so much evidence, especially in European countries and in places like the Netherlands, where people have open, honest conversations with children, where they encourage children to have autonomy at a very young age and to take responsibility for their own sexuality at a very young age. There's just so much evidence that exists, and we just sort of do it very differently here in the US. We are very sort of tight-lipped about any of these conversations with our children. We are very sparing in terms of what we cover in schools. And again, that disconnect has just really showed me that this is an area that needs more writing, more screen time, more discussion. We really need to normalize sort of this open, honest discussion. So again, most of it is just me compiling evidence from all over the world telling us what works to prevent abortion, what works to prevent sexual harassment, what works to prevent teen pregnancy, STIs. Right now in the United States, for several different sexually transmitted infections, we are at the highest rates that we've ever seen. So again, there's a disconnect there between what works and what we're doing. So this is just my attempt to really bridge that gap.
So is this book for parents, or is it for people of any age that's over a certain age, like 13 and beyond, or like what age
right.
and reading it?
That's a great question. I think the short answer is I'm excited about anybody buying my book, to be honest. So it's for everyone. It's really geared towards parents of children of any age. So it's literally, here's kind of everything you need to know about sex and different topics around sexuality. And here's the recommendation for if you're talking to a young person, what should they know about this at each of these sort of age categories. It would also be great for people who are just interested in, hey, I would like an evidence-based description of these topics. You know, if you were to get on the internet and just search, topics related to sexuality, you could get anything under the sun. And a lot of times it's really hard for people to sort out what's fact-based, what's not. Obviously, explicit material is all over the internet, and some people may not want to just search these topics out. So this is really a science-based, evidence-based look, a medically accurate look at a lot of these different topics. And it's especially geared towards people who either have children or work with young people.
Awesome. So you're basically taking the guesswork and the need to research for parents out of the equation so that it's in the hands in one thing that they can read and really move forward in. But the challenge for parents will be, okay, I've read it. Now I have to go do it.
Yes. And hopefully it happens in baby steps. So many people think about the talk and they lose sleep over the talk. And what this does is it takes the talk out of it. It's in baby steps. It's talking about asking permission to hold hands and, those sort of minor conversations that happen all along so that it really doesn't have to be this daunting, isolated talk where you're, rehearsing notes ahead of time. It's more of just learning to have a differentiality and just normalizing these discussions.
Okay. Wow. Well, tell us where we can get your book and when it is available.
Oh, thank you. Well, it will be available all over, including Amazon and all the other typical places that you can order books. It will not be available until October. So I was pretty excited about, I think when the school years start and people start getting excited about sort of a new academic year, we thought that would be a great time to release the book. So it will be available this fall.
Awesome. I'm so excited for you. Wow. What a big accomplishment. Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
You bet. So what do you do going forward with the book? Are you planning to do some speaking engagements or book tours? Or are you going to stay teaching? And what's the future entail for you with this? Because I know it's going to open up a lot in your life.
Yes, thank you. We're in the process of lining all kinds of different things like that up. But yes, all of the things that you listed in addition to just my regular day job of teaching classes and talking about this. But yeah, I think there's some podcast opportunities and some traveling and just talking to different groups. I'm also really excited to hopefully talk to parents. I know one of the interesting things about sexuality education is that there's really no standard curriculum that exists, and from state to state, really what's allowed to teach in the schools is very different. So it's exciting for me to empower parents to be able to really control some of that messaging. Maybe there's a lot of us that can't really control what is offered in our state or what sort of legislation dictates and what the school board dictates. But you do have control over what's discussed in your home. So, and in fact, it's very politically motivated in a lot of ways. So there's different funding streams that dictate what can be covered and what can't be covered. And so depending on, the grants that are given to districts that can determine sort of the level of how comprehensive the sex education is. So I think some people are under the impression that there's just sort of this one curriculum that's taught everywhere, and that's just absolutely not the case. So this gives a little bit more control to parents.
Mm-hmm. That's good. We need to empower the parents.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned consent, and that is one of the critiques of a lot of the sex education that we see in schools now, is that there is very minimal coverage of that particular topic. And I just, again, think it's very essential that that's just our default, is understanding and knowing and practicing consent.
I think that's so scary that it's not taught in schools, and that I'm a well-educated woman. I love to read. I love to research, not necessarily in that topic or vein. So therefore I miss a subject area that is very important to me. It should be, as a mom, to be able to talk to my kids about consent, but missed the boat on that one. I'll admit it. So, oh, geez.
Well, tonight's the night.
Yeah. And you think, well, what about the kids as boyfriends? Did their parents miss the boat too? I mean, is that a conversation you should have when your kids start really dating somebody long term, and talk to the parents of the other side and say, have you talked to your child about consent?
Well, and even hopefully when your kids become more educated and more empowered in that way, hopefully they, continue to sort of share that with peers. And hopefully we can all encourage, with our votes, and when we talk at school board meetings, and when we meet with, when we're part of PTA meetings, just sort of bringing up some of these things and making it on the forefront so that parents do become more educated.
Right. Well, is there anything else that you want to add that we haven't really talked about yet, and that you feel passionate about, that you want on this show?
Oh, well, I just want to say thank you. I think this is certainly part of the solution, is just the more we can talk about these things, the more we can normalize discussions around sexuality, the better off all of us are. And I just appreciate you allowing me to share this message and to kind of get people talking about this.
Absolutely.
So I just want to say thank you.
Yes, you bet. I'm so glad we found each other again online, and that you are agreeing to do this.
Absolutely.
It is such an important topic, and I'm glad we can bring these topics to all of our people, including yours and your network, that need to hear your message and know that you have this amazing book coming. So
thank you.
Yeah. Where can people find you online if
Thanks
you
so much.
Because I don't know if you want to be private, but if you do want people to find you on Instagram or Facebook or by email, what are some ways people can connect with you if they have questions?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. So again, it's Robin Pickering, and that's a great way to reach me, is through that. Wonderful. Yes. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, you have an awesome day, Robin. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.